Morning, welcome to the July 19th, 2023 Licensing Committee meeting. My name is Song Oh, chairperson of the committee. Before we convene, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing pharmacy law. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests ought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. As I facilitate this meeting, I will announce when we are accepting public comments. I advise the meeting moderator to allot 3 minutes to each individual providing comments. We'll begin with public comments for individuals attending in person, followed by public comments by individuals attending via WebEx. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting. Before we get started, I would like to ask staff moderating the meeting to provide general instructions on the process of providing public comment via WebEx. Moderator?
Good morning and thank you. Before we get started, I do want to remind members and staff who are not speaking to mute their microphones to eliminate background noise in WebEx. If I do detect background noise, I will politely mute those microphones. And since there are members of the public in WebEx, I would also ask members and staff to please identify themselves before speaking. For those members of the public joining us on WebEx, we will be using the WebEx question and answer feature as well as the hand raise feature to facilitate public comment. When public comment is called for, I will open the Q&A feature and you will indicate that you want to make a comment by clicking on the Q&A icon, which frequently looks like a question mark inside of a square, typically at the bottom right of your screen. And in that text box, you will type the word comment and then click send to send that through to myself and our panelists. For those who may have technical difficulties with that feature or who have called into the meeting, you can use the hand raise feature. And for those calling in to access that hand raise feature, you would dial *3. We will take public comments in the order that they are received. First, as President Chair O mentioned, they're in Sacramento, and then following that on WebEx. 3 minutes will be allotted for each speaker, and I will be providing a 10-second reminder when your time is about to expire. And with that, I will turn the floor back over to President and Chair O.
Thank you, Shelley. I'd like to take a roll call to establish a quorum. Chair Jig Patel.
Present.
Thank you, Jig. Renee Barker.
Present.
Thank you, Renee. Trevor Chandler.
Present.
Thank you. Jesse Crawley.
Here.
Thank you. Jason Wise. Thank you. And I'm here. A quorum has been established, members. We have a full agenda for our meeting today. I ask everyone participating today to be respectful of the work before the committee today. We encourage participation by members of the public throughout our meetings at appropriate times. The committee respectfully requests that when comments are provided, they're done so in a professional manner, consistent with how the committee conducts its business. What's wrong?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
We're all professionals here, Cesar. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cesar. We're all just back in person, so excited. All right, agenda item 2, public comment for items not on the agenda. I'll now ask the moderator to open the line for individuals to provide the opportunity to provide public comment. You're not required to identify yourself, but may do so. I'd like to remind everyone that the board cannot take action on these items except to decide whether to place an item on a future agenda. Members, following review of the public comments for this agenda item, I'll ask members to comment on what, if any, items should be placed on a future agenda. As a reminder, this agenda item is not intended to be a discussion, rather an opportunity for members of the committee and members of the public to request consideration of an item for future placement on an agenda, at which time discussion may occur. We'll begin with public comment from individuals participating in the Sacramento location. Seeing none, we'll open up for WebEx. Moderator?
Thank you. Our Q&A panel is open. If you'd like to utilize that to request comment, please click on that Q&A icon, type the word comment into the text box, and submit that. We do have one request for comment at this time from Jackie Stover. Jackie, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone. You will need to click the unmute me button at your end and pause for just a moment till the recorded message stops.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jackie Stover. I'm a specialty pharmacist, and I just wanted to say thank you to the Board of Pharmacy for including specialty pharmacy in today's discussion of remote processing. So thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
look forward to hearing your comments during the meeting.
And that is the only comment request we received. Would you like me to close the panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Shelley. Members, any comments before we move on? Okay, moving on to next agenda item 3, approval of January 24th and April 5th, 2023 committee meeting minutes. As you may recall, we did not have a quorum for our last meeting. As such, we have minutes from 2 meetings to review and, if appropriate, approve. The first is minutes from the January 24th, 2023 meeting minutes, which are included in the meeting material. Members, as we begin, I'll ask members if you have any questions or comments on the draft minutes from the January 24th, 2023 meeting. I would also entertain a motion if you believe such action is appropriate.
This is Jesse. I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jesse. Jesse motions.
This is Jig. I'll second it.
Thank you, Jig. Jig seconds. Any comments, members? Seeing none, moderator, please open the any public comment from Sacramento? Seeing none, moderator, please open the line for public comments via WebEx.
Our Q&A panel is open, and you may also raise your hand as well if you'd like to make a comment on the motion before you. Again, that Q&A icon looks like a question mark inside of a square, the lower right of your screen. And seeing no requests for comment, would you like me to close the panel?
Yes, please. Thank you, Shelley. All right, with a motion and second and public comment, we'll do a roll call. Jig Patel.
Yes.
Thank you, Jig. Renee Barker.
Yes.
Renee. Trevor Chandler.
Yes.
Thank you. Jesse Crowley.
Yes.
Thank you. Jason Wise.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason, and I vote yes. The motion passes. Next, moving on to the minutes from April 5th, 2023 meeting. Members, do you have any questions or comments on the draft minutes from April 5th, 2023 meeting? I'd also entertain a motion if you believe such action is appropriate.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Jesse. Jesse motions.
This is Jig. I'll second it.
Thank you, Jake. Jake seconds. With a motion and second, we'll open up for public comment in Sacramento. Seeing none, we'll open up for public comment for WebEx.
Again, that Q&A panel is open if you'd like to make a comment on the motion before you. Calling users, as a reminder, you can dial *3 to raise your hand. And seeing no requests, I will close the panel.
Thank you, moderator. With motion and second and public comment, we'll take a roll call vote. Jig Patel.
Yes.
Thank you, Jig. Renee.
Yes.
Thank you, Renee. Trevor.
Yes.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yes.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes.
Thank you, and I vote yes. The motion passes. All right, moving on to the next agenda item 4, discussion and consideration of provisions for remote processing. You may recall we have discussed remote processing several times over the past year, including during our January meeting where we considered several policy questions and received significant public comment in support of making permanent provisions for remote processing for pharmacists working in hospitals and community pharmacies, while other comments expressed concern with the board taking such action. More recently, as part of our April meeting, we reviewed what could be a possible legislative framework. As we did not have a quorum, no recommendations were offered from that discussion. However, there were significant public comment as well. The draft minutes provide detail of the discussion. Related to this issue, during our February board meeting, the board voted to sponsor legislation to make permanent limited provisions related to remote medication chart order review for inpatient hospital or inpatient settings. These provisions are included in Assembly Bill 1557. We have previously committed to continue our consideration of potential provisions to allow for remote processing for pharmacists working in community pharmacies. During our prior discussion, as a committee, we did not reach consensus on whether remote processing was appropriate for pharmacists working in community pharmacy. I also note that we received public comment from pharmacists that we're currently working in a remote capacity under the board's waiver and potential consequences if provisions are not made permanent. This is a complicated issue, as we all know. The services pharmacists provide vary greatly, as do their work environments. After reflection on this issue, I think it may be helpful to consider some fundamental questions related to the issue in the hopes we can reach some consensus on some of these questions. I believe if we're able to reach consensus today and the board as part of its discussion agrees, we'll have a path forward for future discussion. Thank you very much for all of the stakeholders that have provided feedback during all of these meetings. Your input is very important as we consider this issue. As noted, the committee and board need to determine what is best for consumers consistent with our mandate. Which leads us our first question. I know we did ask this again, but we're just trying to set the tone. Does the committee believe there is a benefit for consumers to allow pharmacists to work from remote location? We've already asked this question, as I said, but just to set the tone, also, while this seems like a simple question, I believe the answer is a bit difficult. I believe there is a great potential for pharmacists to work from remote locations to the benefit of patients, but only if the remote work does not come at the expense of pharmacists working directly in community pharmacies, providing direct patient care services, consultation, etc. I could envision great opportunities, but regrettably, I see the market moving away from staffing pharmacists in community pharmacy as well. I'm concerned about that remote provisions could further exacerbate the problem, thereby reducing patient access to pharmacists and pharmacies. This would be a significant detriment to patients. Members, please share your thoughts on this question, and I'm hoping to gather as much input as possible, so I know we like to not say much sometimes, but speak up so we can gather as much everyone's thoughts on this issue as much as possible.
Hi, President O. So I agree with a lot of the concerns that you brought up. A couple kind of elaborating on a few with my specific concerns is obviously we're in a pharmacist staffing crunch right now that doesn't seem to be abating, and so there's absolutely a need for some form of remote processing to make sure that we are kind of sharing the burden across the state as necessary for folks that are credentialed and able to do so. And the fact that it's already been happening, and there seems to be a good amount of best practices put in there makes me comfortable with the idea of it. Secondly, one of the things that I also want to make sure we consider, and I think this goes into some of the draft language that's been put in here, is being very specific about what counts for remote processing. Obviously, across the state and across the country, we've had an over-prescribing issue, an epidemic, specifically as it relates to opioids. And one of the issues with that has been pharmacies pressuring their pharmacists to generate as many prescriptions as possible, which having them be in the pharmacy and actually having the accountability of being in a pharmacy is one of the safeguards from preventing this over-prescribing. And so that's something that I'm thinking about is depending on what this remote processing allows, what accountability it has to make sure that overworking pharmacists, or now that they're not in the pharmacy setting, whether that would potentially enable continued pressuring for generating just not the number of prescriptions is something that I'm acutely thinking about given our current situation and obviously the settlements across the state for these practices that have happened in the pharmacy. So I think I'll hold off there, but as far as the way I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about making sure that we have accountability for the filling of prescriptions, that we have accountability for ensuring that pharmacists aren't being, if they are not going to be in a pharmacy setting, that there are additional safeguards to being sure they aren't pressured to fulfill a quota number. And so those are a couple of the top things that are, I'm thinking about as we consider these proposals.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you for those comments.
This is Jake. You know, if we talk about remote processing and how it helps consumers, I agree with a lot of things Trevor said. You know, we got to have guardrails, et cetera. Our remote areas, we have a lot of rural areas in California, and in those areas, there's been significant reduction in hours of operation and access. And one of the reasons is of lack of pharmacist availability in these areas. And if remote processing is allowed, it's going to help. Even if there is one pharmacist and a technician working, it can facilitate the workflow and the consumer will benefit. Sometimes the prescription might not be ready for like 2 days. And that's a very serious access issue, and I feel that remote processing is a blessing with the guardrails so that it's not abused, and I think it will significantly benefit the consumers. My second thought long term is the number of enrollment in pharmacy schools. So the pharmacists in the pipeline, very low. It's a historic low number of pharmacy students in California schools that are being enrolled. So we're really concerned about that, how this problem is not going to go away anytime soon of be able to recruit pharmacists in rural areas and access for our consumers. So, and the other piece is pharmacist opportunities across hospitals are increasing quite a bit. So their clinical roles are multiplying every day, and that will further put stress on retail community pharmacies able to recruit retail community pharmacists. So given all of that together, if in an urban area, if there is a group of pharmacists that can support, that's a blessing. Somebody made a comment about specialty medications. I mean, I don't know the exact percent of prescriptions that are being filled today that are specialty, but I know that in the last 5 years, it has quadrupled. And specialty does play a huge role in a lot of disease states, and we are going to need those specialty pharmacists working remotely, supporting hub stores in fulfilling the specialty meds, especially long-acting mental health injections, which is a big part of specialty, and it helps the homeless crisis that our state faces right now, and those networks play a huge role. So, yeah, I'm for remote processing with proper guidelines.
Thank you,
and guardrails.
Thank you.
Hey, Song, it's Jessie. I agree with a lot of the stuff that's already been said, echoing what Trevor said, that there needs to be very specific language, and we need to be as clear as possible in terms of what remote duties actually are, what it looks like in a facility versus outside of a facility. Echoing what Jig said too, I benefit from specialty pharmacists. We do long-acting antipsychotic injections at my pharmacy, and having those remote pharmacists help support us, help with the billing process, saves us a lot of time, even though it's still time-consuming to perform those. So I'm really excited that we're talking about specialty, the benefit of that, and just having those expert pharmacists be able to do those in-depth consultations that we at a normal retail setting really don't have the knowledge and background, because we're not dealing with those medications as regularly as specialty pharmacists, I think is really important. I think this discussion is good moving forward. And kind of touching on something you said, Sung, I just want to make sure that as we're discussing this, we don't take away from the benefit of really having that one-on-one interaction in a community setting, that's really beneficial. I mean, even as we're transitioning to in-person meetings, we see how much of a difference it is to be in person and make that connection with someone. And I think that consumers really benefit from that. So striking that balance, I think, is really important as we continue the discussion moving forward.
Thank you, Jesse. Any other comments? Jason, Renee?
Sure, I'll chime in here, Chero. I think I'm in agreement with everyone. It's just the question, the crux of it is how do we do it? The guardrails, the safety plans. Clearly, we know that it is a benefit to the community, to the consumers, and can be to the pharmacists. Just how do we do it safely and appropriately?
Thank you.
This is Renee. I'm pretty much just going to say the same, that I really agree with all these points, and, you know, even his little more succinct summary, which is, yes, there's definitely a role for it, and it's needed, but I think it's in defining this so that we still protect the consumers. I agree with Jesse that still that interaction is important, and even what that might look like could possibly be remote for some people also, but make sure that there's, you know, always actual physical, possibly interaction, but I definitely think that this is needed.
Great. Okay. Glad we asked this question again so that we kind of get some fresher perspectives and some updates. So that's good. So with that, any other comments before I open up for public comment? I would imagine we have a few folks in here. Hopefully we'll chime in. One is here in Sacramento. Good morning, Dr. Gray.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on this extremely important subject. I also agree that there's great benefit to the public in a variety of areas. One of them, as mentioned, I think it was member Jake Patel, the ability for pharmacists who are able to do what is known in the industry as load balancing, where you have a pharmacy that has the staffing particularly available that can help out another pharmacy where the staffing isn't available. And that is particularly a problem in some of our underserved areas. And the underserved areas, remember, does not just mean rural. There are many urban areas that are underserved and pharmacies that are struggling to get people that want to live and work in those areas. And unfortunately, some of those are some of our more crime-ridden areas. So I think that is very important from a work perspective, and gives the ability of that pharmacist who is there to talk to patients more and work more in depth with the patients that need more need. But another aspect was mentioned by Board Member Crowley, who, you know, the pharmacists that have the special skills, especially with high-risk drugs, new drugs, such as the new drugs for psych that she mentioned, which is a biggest issue in California right now with mental health services, to get that expertise involved from outside pharmacists that specialize, whether it be that psychiatric or other, is very important. Because the reality is we're all wonderful pharmacists. We like to think we know everything about every drug, but it's gone beyond that, and we need those. That brings me to one of my concerns, and we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but in the draft language, it talks about that pharmacists who are employed by the pharmacy. And that seems to be that the pharmacist that can do remote processing has to be an employee of the pharmacy that's doing the dispensing. And I don't think that's really what you mean, because those outside specialty pharmacists for psych, for oncology, for all of these immunosuppressive drugs, for organ transplant, they're not the pharmacists that are the specialists that can give that in detail DUR, that can do that consultation, that can advise that. They are not employees. Now, maybe it's a matter of semantics. There's a different, when you look up the definition of employee, which is to use someone, versus an employee, which is someone who is, you know, a W-2 rated employee of the pharmacy. And so I think Jason Weiss, a board member, got to it, is how do we do it? What are the specifics and what do we really mean? And then lastly, I want to make sure that you don't mean to do anything with the current BPP 407.1.1. It is very important to allow prescribers, in particular, including pharmacists who are prescribers, to enter that information into the pharmacy computer system directly. And that's what that was all about. We sponsored that legislation at Kaiser Permanente, and I can elaborate more why that's important, because by getting into the computer, they get the profile and the information directly they can't get from the medical record. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Morning, Lindsay.
Good morning. Lindsay Goldhorn with the California Community Pharmacy Coalition. Good to see everybody again. So we thank the committee for continuing to consider this. We do support a statutory proposal to provide permanent authorization to allow for remote processing for community pharmacies. As I've expressed before, many of our members safely and securely were able to utilize remote processing before the waiver, during the waiver. So again, very much support efforts to do this through the legislature. We did have pharmacists who unfortunately lost their jobs after the waiver. Our members, when possible, offered these remote workers to come into the pharmacy, but for a lot of different reasons, they were not able to make that shift, or I think most of them weren't able to. For some, the distance was too far. For some, they had childcare issues or disabilities that prevented them from working in the pharmacy. So for people like this, we'd love to see a continuation to allow them to get back to working remotely. And in terms of fears about jobs being taken out of the pharmacy, we really don't think that will be the case. As Board Member Patel mentioned, it's already difficult to recruit pharmacists and technicians. There is a reduction of students in the pipeline in pharmacy schools, and we think that remote processing will help take the stress off of the workforce inside of the pharmacy. And actually, we polled our members, and during the waiver, and even before the waiver, because we believed remote processing was allowed prior to the waiver, there weren't really a ton of remote workers, less than on average one per pharmacy, I think much less than that. And so of course, that would probably increase if there was explicit authorization, but I think there's plenty of work to do in pharmacies, and I think just allowing for this extra option would really be helpful. As you've heard, most states in the U.S. allow for remote work, lots of benefits to this, greater flexibility for pharmacists, work-life balance, all of those things. So again, hope that there is authorization in the future, and glad to be here to be part of discussing the details. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments, Lindsay. Morning, Laurie.
Good morning, board members. Lori Walmsley on behalf of Walgreens. Nice to see you all again today. Thank you for the continued conversation on this very important topic. As you've heard from a lot of others, we really see this as an opportunity to offer our employees different types of employment options. We've used remote processing at Walgreens for a number of years, and this has allowed us to respond to things like the public health crisis relative to COVID, to be able to expand our reach into communities and to be able to provide on-demand service quickly for our pharmacists, as well as the ability to handle things like hurricanes and fires and things like that, where perhaps you aren't able to physically have people in that area, and all of a sudden the community moves from one place to another, and we're not able to respond to that as quickly because you perhaps just don't even have the people that live in that area. So I would encourage you to keep the language broad, appreciate the conversation, and happy to be here to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the comments. Morning.
Hello, Mark Johnston with CVS Health. It's a pleasure to see everybody in person. I do have to apologize. While I was here, my room was burglarized and all of my possessions were stolen, so I don't have my computer with all of my statistics that I was hoping to provide. By memory, I believe there's 45 states that allow pharmacists to work from home. The other 5 states are silent. I believe they allow, or the other 4 states, but there's a bit of a question mark. The point is the overwhelming majority of the states do allow this. Most do it with a short sentence. Nobody has 2 pages of law. Once you overregulate a topic, you have limited it and stifle future growth. For instance, you have a list of the allowable activities. These allowable activities, as the profession of pharmacy grows, are likely to grow, and then you'd have to change statute again. Within the list of allowable activities, you've listed insurance processing, which I don't think you have statutory authority to address insurance processing. I believe insurance processing happens wide scale, not only by pharmacies, but by many entities currently, and so you'd be wrapping that into regulation. I'm not sure if that was really the intent. But mostly I'm concerned with a statement that says that work at home, remote work can only be used to improve patient care. Most of what we're talking about is, maintaining patient care, assisting with workload in the pharmacy. I'm not sure it actually improves patient care, but it certainly maintains patient care. Also, it says that you can't reduce staffing levels. I would think that every keystroke that's done outside of a pharmacy is reducing a staffing level. Now that may be because somebody calls in sick or whatnot, but there's nobody in the pharmacy, so by its inherent nature, it's reducing the staffing level. And we talk about employing disabled pharmacists or single parents or folks that could really use a job working remotely. But that does reduce the staffing level in the pharmacy. So I think that line item effectively just eliminates the entire use of any kind of work remotely, if I understand correctly. I'm realizing that my time is winding down. The only other comment that I have is a restriction on laptops. I haven't had a desktop computer at work or at home for a decade. During the pandemic, we used plenty of laptops that were secure in nature. So mandating laptops is a bit puzzling too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. There will be plenty of opportunities. Also, just a reminder, this draft statutory proposal, we considered that in April. I think we're probably thinking a little fresh thoughts, so welcome that. Thank you for the comments. So bring it back to members. Any other comments?
WebEx comments.
Oh, sorry. Forgot about WebEx. Getting confused here. Sorry, Shelley. Moderator, any public comments? I would imagine there's few as well.
There's a couple, no problem. We're all getting used to getting back into in-person hybrid meetings. First comment comes from Jackie Stover. And Jackie, I've sent a request to unmute your microphone. You click the unmute me button.
Hi, thank you. This is Jackie Stover again. Thank you for the continued conversation on remote processing. I have been working at a specialty pharmacy for 6 years. 3 of which were at home, and now that we're back on site because the waiver expired for the remote processing. So having worked on site and remotely, I can see that the primary difference lies in the quality of our patients' care. Working remotely has provided many benefits, specifically the improved quality of care for patients in the following ways. Prompt intervention of patients' medication regimens when issues arise, eliminating time spent commuting on site to log into the computer, thereby allowing faster turnaround time to provide safe, life-saving medications to patients faster. Undivided attention to patients during consultations without the normal distractions of an office environment. And finally, less missing work due to illness, therefore impacting the productivity and the efficiency in providing life-saving medications to our patients. So I truly believe that specialty pharmacy, PBM, continue to make their emergence in the pharmacy profession. It is important to have reflective legislation to ensure that our patients get the best quality care that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you for the comments.
The next comment comes from Penny. Penny, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone. You should see an unmute me button pop up at your end. If you click on that and then pause just a moment for the recording to stop.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I am a clinical pharmacist in specialty, and I have worked at home for 4 years. I feel that working at home has greatly improved the workflow in our office. I can take on a great amount of work, lessening the load for those in the pharmacy. I can only see benefits of having other people working at home off-site to support the staff that's in the office. They can have more face-to-face time with patients, and that's very important. So we can also do clinical duties or all times of the day, 24/7 if needed. We erase the commute time, which can take hours out of our day. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments.
Next, our comment comes from Kim. Kim, I've sent a request to unmute your microphone. You'll need to click the unmute me button that appears at your end.
You hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. I am a computer system analyst. I take care of all the computer from UC Berkeley a lot, the whole department. And my organization requests I can work from home. That I help all the organization much better anytime. So that's my point of view. Customer go first. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment.
Next up is John Gray. John, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, good morning. This is John Gray. I'm a registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide our comments on this very important topic. Based on our favorable experience with pharmacist and technician remote work during the public health emergency, we continue to believe that the current, the board's remote processing waiver that expired in May is the best available framework for the statutory changes that are needed to authorize remote prescription processing on a permanent basis. We agree that guardrails are necessary, but not sure that they need to go much beyond what was the guardrails that were present in the waiver. Because we believe that the more onerous and restrictive the requirements associated with pharmacy personnel remote work are, the less likely pharmacy organizations are to be able to participate, thereby reducing the benefits to consumers and the regulated public. And, an important point I want to flag, I flagged it in January, but I want to flag it again. There was a 2022 study by McKinsey & Company that found that certain traditionally underrepresented groups have a stronger than average preference for remote or hybrid work arrangements and may be likelier to leave their job if remote work or hybrid work was not available. And so we encourage the board to consider the diversity, equity, and inclusion implications of any remote work statutory language, particularly as it relates to Governor Newsom's Executive Order N1622. More broadly, and more to the question in bullet number 1, we see this as remote work as good for licensees who might otherwise not be able to work in a traditional pharmacy setting. We see this as good for the pharmacists in the pharmacies who benefit from the support of the remote pharmacists. We see this as good for pharmacies since they can dynamically provide support to where it's most needed and balance workloads, as others have mentioned. And all of the above translate to positive outcomes for consumers, particularly in cases where pharmacies may be faced with a choice of closing their doors if they can't get creative about how they staff the pharmacies. So we see this as a benefit in those situations where consumers might otherwise lose their pharmacy if this isn't an option. In my view, I see opponents to pharmacist remote work as looking at this from a zero-sum perspective. thinking that if this is good for someone else, then it must be bad for them. And from a rent-seeking perspective, in that they are trying to protect what they already have. We don't see it that way. We see remote processing as a win-win for pharmacists, pharmacies, and consumers broadly. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comments on this really important topic.
Thank you for the comments, Dr. Gray.
Our next comment comes from Derek Smith. Derek, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Okay, yeah, I'd just like to give my support for the work from home initiative for the specialty pharmacists.
Thank you. And next comment comes from Safia. I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
I want to thank the Board of Pharmacy for having these discussions and for always looking for new ways to help our patients. So I just wanted to also speak up as a specialty pharmacist who's worked in specialty for about 5 years, and how I've participated in work from home in the last 3 years, and how it made me a good pharmacist. And I was able to move those positive aspects of working from home to my patients and care for them better. Some of the points were mentioned, like less office distractions, less commute time, less call-off times as a pharmacist. So I agree with all those points made in the previous aspects. And then also I just wanted to add, I believe specialty pharmacy would qualify the most for work from home, just based on how specialty pharmacies are set up. We have a front-end department and a back-end department. So as of right now, the front-end department has non-patient face-to-face interactions. We assist with the pre-verifications on prescriptions. We also have non-medication handling. And then we have the back-end pharmacist that does the traditional aspects of a pharmacist's duty. So they actually do a second verifications on prescriptions, they actually handle the medication, and they do verifications on what was filled. So that aspect makes sense of why we wouldn't want back-end to work from home. That's impossible. But for the front-end team, it would make the most sense to work from home, because we're already doing things that the patient would not know if we're working from home or we're working in an office setting.
Thank you for the comment.
And that concludes our requests for comments at this time. I will close the panel.
Thank you, Shelley. With that, any member comments?
Sung, are we going to have a little discussion on the proposal, the statutory proposal at all?
Oh, you could say your piece on it. I think that was brought up last meeting, and I think we didn't really land anywhere with that proposal, so we're probably going to try to come up with something else from the discussion today, and then go from there.
Well, I just had one thought on the first point there, and it says a pharmacist licensed in California and a pharmacy within California. Now, I'm thinking in the line of who can do, let's say, data entry today. You could hire a clerk, train them for 2 days, and on the third day, they could do data entry. This person might have not even finished high school. And if a pharmacist that's licensed in other state is doing data entry for a pharmacy, that's less risk to consumer compared to a clerk typing a prescription in a pharmacy that has just been trained 2 days. Just logically, I'd rather have a pharmacist do that than somebody that has just been trained 2 days. The chances of that person making an error is different. Now, what Trevor mentioned, there's controlled substances and other, it could be worded in a way where you cannot touch a controlled substance. So you remove all the opiate, the amphetamines, all of that out of the picture. Now you're just talking about regular medications, the antibiotics, the eye drops, the ear drops, the basics, non-controlled substances. And and, you know, it could be worded in a manner so that we are not limiting it to just California licensed pharmacists. B, specialty pharmacy, it's such a niche, and, you know, it's growing, but like Dr. Gray mentioned, it's, you know, to find somebody with that expertise in a remote processing environment, you know, happen to be, it's hard to find somebody with that kind of skill set. So, you know, if they are not licensed in California, and they are not touching controlled substances, then why could we not allow somebody that's not licensed?
Totally hear you. You are opening a huge can of worms, though. Here, we did start with that language because first the waiver was very limited to California, within California. So we you know, we already have a struggle to figure out a consensus and landing spot. So I think we go that route. I think this is just not going to go any. I mean, remember, we had a legislative proposal in 2021. We tried to go to the legislature and it went nowhere, even with that very limited proposal that we made it very conservative. And I think if we open it up, with all the respect, I just don't see a path forward. Remember, this does require statutory proposal to go through the legislatures. So I think that that's a great concept, and I agree in many ways. I think there's a huge opportunity. Whatever we can do to help alleviate the stress of pharmacists working in the pharmacies, I really am all about it, you know. But I think that we just have to also be mindful what we think is realistic and why we brought these 5 questions, just to kind of back to basics of where we can go. Coming from looking at the waivers that we've had and also the statutory proposal we've drafted and we approved back in 2021, and then just kind of building upon there. So that's why this proposal was drafted, just to see where we can land. And I think that this is also a little bit challenging landing spot. So back to the drawing board, here we are. So that hopefully makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I was just trying to logically think about it, and, you know, if we present it in a manner where, just like what I mentioned, that, you know, in today's world, what's the reality of certain tasks? And I'm just talking about, like I said, a few things. There are other controlled substances and everything else. We don't want to go there, and we can put that in the language here. And
yeah, I don't know. I personally don't think I would be comfortable opening it up to outside of states. For me, but I totally understand. Yeah, I think there's a benefit, but it's just not there yet. I don't see that we can do that. I mean, I think, you know, we're just trying to do one step at a time, and then we'll go from there, because that's where we were, I think. So, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. I would be extremely hesitant to allow anyone from other states. Totally agree with everything you're saying, Jig, though, in terms of course, I would trust a pharmacist from another state, regardless of what state is, versus an unlicensed person who may be trained for a couple days, which happens all the time in our pharmacies, unfortunately, with the state of staffing and everything. I do want to kind of comment on, I think it was Dr. John Gray who has brought up the study and has referenced it a few times, and from the DII perspective, how remote work could benefit workers. So I guess my ask is for any of the companies or representatives who did experience or have remote workers, I would be curious to see if there is any demographic data. If you have that and you could bring it back to the board at some point, I would be interested to review that. I think the bulk of the discussion we've had from a DEI perspective has been, of course, people with disabilities or things like that. So if there's any additional data, I would be very curious to have that and review it as a board.
Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, I just wanted to get staff opinion on the two issues that were raised. One of the employee versus employee language and whether that makes sense to change or how significant that change would be, as well as just about the use of portable electronic devices or laptop computers and whether that was language that came from another proposal or the background for that. And then after that, I have more of a broader process question.
I'd like to chime in a little bit about the employee thing.
Yeah.
Specialty is a very complicated process in general. I will say from my experience in community pharmacy, there are kind of two basic pathways. So either their insurance covers it from our specialty pharmacy through Albertsons, and then our remote pharmacists who are employees of our company can kind of do the back end work. The other option is maybe their insurance does not cover it at our particular pharmacy. So in that case, their prescriptions have to be filled at someone else's specialty pharmacy, and then that ends up being mailed from us. So in that scenario, it would be someone who's not employed who's doing the specialty end, and then we end up administering it. So I think there are cases where there is an employee who's a specialty pharmacist, and in other cases, they're not necessarily an employee from the pharmacy they're actually getting it from.
All on the spot from Ann here.
So being super candid, Trevor, we're going to have to look into it. I think that the language that we used in the draft that we kind of put to the table said employed by, so council and I we can absolutely go back and forth on that. I think that, as Jesse's comments really highlighted is, there's probably different models. And so understanding that, I think once we kind of know where the policy is going, then I think it's going to be a little bit easier to try to pull something together. And I think that's probably why we went back to like asking the questions because it feels a little bit like we're struggling in some areas to get consensus. And so I feel like from moving forward, we need to see where the consensus is and go from there.
Okay, makes sense.
I would advise to not focus too much on the draft statutory proposal. I would just kind of think a little fresh in a way. So I'm thinking that hopefully there's an opportunity for us here. We'll see how we land today, but I'm hoping from some questions we'll have some ideas of going forward on our next meeting, and hopefully we'll have the statutory proposal next meeting. So we'll have something for next meeting. Hoping from our discussion today.
I have one broader process question, because obviously, I mean, we've heard that remote processing was happening prior to the waiver, and then now during the waiver, and now and now that the waiver is over, it's my understanding that remote processing is currently happening, or is it completely done right now? I'm just gonna, because that's the confusing part for me, is if the remote processing was already happening prior to the waiver, then we had the remote processing during the waiver and the epidemic. Are the same practices that were being done before the waiver now being done now that it's gone? That's a confusing aspect.
You're not alone in that boat, Trevor. I'll tell you that. And if you want to speak to that as much as you can, I think it's a very tricky question as well. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'll keep my comments kind of high level if that's okay.
Please, ma'am.
So based on some of the public comment that we've heard, for specialty pharmacists, it sounds like they are back in. And as Member Crowley had previously highlighted, there are provisions where they could work in a different pharmacy performing some of those services. So hopeful that maybe some of that is happening as well. We do know that there are provisions that are still being done specifically for hospital, because we have a specific waiver tied to the federal declaration, and then we have the legislation moving forward in 1557. So for the chart order stuff. So I guess we would say that we're always hopeful that people are complying with the law.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. Well, I think this topic itself was a big education for all of us when the pandemic happened. Didn't realize some of the things that, were happening. where strictly where we were in terms of legal opinions. So with that, moving on to the next question. Hopefully that answered some. Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I am a public member, so I think my questions may be a little more basic. I certainly don't want to impede what pharmacists are doing remotely right now, but I think we do have a great opportunity to expand patient care and keep people that we have trained in this industry working. So to follow up off of what Jake said, and I am not in favor of having out-of-state workers going and doing processing these prescriptions. But if we were to move controlled substances off of remote and just use non-controlled medications, do we gain any ground on there? Can we get consensus? I don't want to. If people are already doing controlled substance processing, I don't want to limit that for what pharmacists are already doing remotely. But do we gain any ground by expanding the conversation to just non-controlled medications?
I think we'll have opportunity to discuss that on the future questions. And in some ways, we'll kind of see where we land here. I think that's challenging because controlled substances, it would be nice for pharmacists to be able to take real time and evaluating it, because it does go a lot extra time for pharmacists in the pharmacy, but you know that also the concerns about diversion is and more possible fraudulent activities are real as well. So since you brought it up, I'm curious what members are thinking on that question about control, non-control.
This is Jessie. I still personally wouldn't be super comfortable. California has a pretty rigid licensing exam in general. A lot of it is clinical, and so I'm much more confident. Unfortunately, this isn't a knock on any other states, but I am a lot more comfortable with another California registered pharmacist to actually be performing any data verification. Control versus non-control, I absolutely would not be comfortable at all with a controlled substance. Just from a legal perspective, there's a lot of laws that vary from state to state, but even just from a clinical perspective, I would have a lot more confidence in a registered California pharmacist verifying for me versus a non.
Gotcha. Tend to agree.
You know, to answer your question, 80% roughly it's non-controlled substance. So the impact, if you remove controlled substance, you kind of expand the horizon of remote processing quite a bit. But if you remove just controlled substance, it's not going to be detrimental to a lot of categories of disease states and the treatment plan.
All right. Moving on to the next question. And here I thought we were going to be done early today. Does the committee believe there is a benefit to consumers, but only for specific types of pharmacy models, e.g., example, closed-door pharmacies, specialty pharmacies? So again, a very challenging question for me. I am conflicted generally about the best approach to regulate the various pharmacy practice settings. As you know, we only license one type of pharmacy that's non-hospital. It's just PHY here in California mainly. Pharmacy law has already drawn some distinctions between authorities and hospital, for example. I have some concerns with taking such an approach for remote processing, but I do believe the concerns that I stated previously about pharmacists' accessibility in community pharmacies is not equal across the broad spectrum of different types of community pharmacies, whether it be closed-door, specialty, or retail. I do note that the board does not have definitions of these types of pharmacies either, which may in part make this more complicated, and I don't believe, as far as I know, there is a definition of specialty pharmacies clearly over the spectrum as a licensing type in California. So that may be making it more difficult. I'm really not a fan of this concept, but we're leaning toward, learning from our member discussion. I think in a perfect world, hopefully we can carve out but I have an idea. I'm going to present it near the end of our discussion. Hopefully we can land there, but we'll open up for discussion for our members.
I guess to start, I have a question. Maybe this is a question for staff or for council. The impression that I've gotten from most of the discussion is that absolutely, especially in specialty, there's definitely a benefit and a need for remote work, and I think we could figure that out. But I guess from a legal perspective, since there is no definition, what does that look like for us if we're creating this sort of language? Say we land on a just specialty or something. Are we in, I guess, muddied waters trying to figure out?
So this is Corinne Gartner, counsel to the board. Yes, I mean, I believe that if you were going to go down that road, you would probably need to craft, statutory definitions for what the different types of pharmacies would be, and, those don't exist now, so.
Great, thank you.
I recommend we keep it simple. Pharmacy, licensed pharmacy. Remote processing, it's a blessing for any pharmacy, and, I've mentioned this before in prior meetings, that it's also a form of disaster preparedness for the state. I know we have waivers and we roll it out, but how quickly can somebody put an infrastructure together? Equipment, all the requirements, everything that, that we are proposing right now. I know that's not final, but a lot of it would be in it, and, how fast they can prepare. So just leave it open for everybody, especially the bigger chains, and all of them would be prepared if something were to happen. So just leave it open to everybody.
I agree. Yep, I tend to agree with that.
And our state is prone to everything other than hurricanes.
I'm still conflicted with the community setting specifically, as we haven't really talked about it today, but in terms of liability, the PIC, who is actually processing for that, who is liable for everything that happens. Also the disconnect between someone who's verifying and someone who's counseling the patient. That happens a lot, even from one pharmacy to another. So you have a floater pharmacist. There may be something that you would counsel your patient on because you are familiar with the patient. You can talk to them. You know their history. That someone who's processing remotely would miss. And so that's where I'm torn with keeping it so broad and allowing it for all chain community settings. It's my understanding, and maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of the disaster piece, it seems like a lot of the chain pharmacies already do have the infrastructure to react appropriately and be able to help remotely if there's wildfires or things like that, to assist in whatever pharmacies may be affected by those. So yeah, I'm really torn on where we land here in terms of like a broad versus very specific allowance of remote processing, and what activities would actually be allowed. Like the final verification piece for me, I feel very uncomfortable about in terms of actually verifying the final product. Having someone else doing that for me stresses me out just thinking about it.
Gotcha. Any other comments from members?
I would just say my initial inclination is to make it universal, this pharmacy in general, rather than getting too specific about it.
Yeah.
That's definitely a gut on my part, not something that's firmly held, but I think if we're going to do this and make it accessible, we should make it accessible to all pharmacies.
Okay. With that, we're going to go for public comment in Sacramento. Dr. Gray.
Good morning. Thank you again. On this particular question, I also suggest that at least at this time you keep it more universal, and you keep in mind the variety of pharmacies that we have. And one of them that it is very important to have remote processing on is the pharmacists that are doing the drug profile review in long-term care facilities. They often don't work in a pharmacy, and in fact, most of them believe that the best way to do that, and maybe the way that is required by law, is they have to actually go out to the long-term facility and review that profile and make any changes whether it's under their own authority as a prescriber or whether they're contacting the prescriber and getting a change in the medication that that patient is on. So that's another type of pharmacy. They're currently licensed as PHY pharmacies. They don't have a special category, and they're also broadening out now to not be just long-term care or intermediate care, but they're actually working very well in assisted living facilities, which as our population ages, there are more and more patients in assisted living, which are not licensed by the California Department of Public Health. They're licensed by the California Department of Social Services, and there really is no one with expertise in those facilities that can help those patients, help their families. So it's a very important to remember that there are pharmacists that are working in a greater percentage of our population in assisted living facilities in actually managing that drug therapy. And it's a growing opportunity for employment. The other thing I'd like to mention real quickly about the thing of controlled substances, if you look at 407.1.1, which was put in statute, it does not allow remote order entry into a hospital or pharmacy system, even by a pharmacist, for controlled substances. That already has been ruled out in statute. So if you are going to allow it, you're going to need to go back and change that statute to do that. It also very deliberately, again, that was a bill we sponsored at my former employer. It does require that the person be licensed in California. It says licensed under Division 2, which means Division 2 of the California statutes, which would include all healthcare providers, physicians, dentists, even pharmacists, of course, but even pharmacy technicians are licensed under Division 2. So there's a difference between being a California licensed practitioner and entering versus in. And that was deliberately put in because of issues in like Lake Tahoe, where the pharmacist was licensed in California, but was remotely working across the border in Nevada, or up in Humboldt County, or in Needles, et cetera. In other words, that was a long debate, and they said, well, as long as we have jurisdiction over them, it doesn't matter really where they're working from, and so you might want to cut it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gray.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. Mark Johnson from CVS. A couple of points. One, we were talking about across state lines, but that goes both ways. I think the focus was on people out of the state practicing into California. There's pharmacists up until May 28th that were working in California that were servicing pharmacies and patients outside of the state, and because they weren't allowed to continue on with working remotely, those jobs were moved to another state. So, the decisions do have ramifications on employment for California residents. The other, we talked controlled substances, but it made me think of, to me, the most important reason why you would want to have people work remotely, so you don't have their hands in the pharmacy. People who work at home can't divert. To me, as you balance public safety concerns, if there's any public safety concern about remote work, the benefit is they're not in the pharmacy. They can't divert. The folks that I believe statistics will show that divert the most are technicians. There's roughly half the states that allow technicians to work from home. The first couple of states, there's in my mind, some over-regulation. It might be a paragraph regulation. Most states recognize the benefits of having technicians outside of the pharmacy and allow it by a sentence or two of rule. I said most states, it's about half the states. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment, Mark. Seeing none, we will open up for WebEx for public comment. Moderator.
Thank you. Our Q&A panel is open. If you'd like to make a comment through that, please click on that Q&A icon, type the word comment into the text box, and submit that through to me and the panelists. You can also raise your hand. For our call-in users, you can dial *3 to do so. Our first comment comes from Paige Talley. Paige, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Representing the California Council for the Advancement of Pharmacy. And I just want to echo what Dr. Gray said about long-term care consultants, consultant pharmacists and SNFs, skilled nursing facilities, ICFs. They are required by OBRA to be there. And so they are not typically employees of pharmacies any longer. They used to be, but there was a hoopla about it, and so they're not. And also with ALFs, social services does have some kind of requirement that a pharmacist go to the facilities periodically, but it isn't as extensive as in long-term care facilities. And I have members who service ALFs, and they're very good at it, and they should be considered to be included in this remote processing. And I also agree with Mark Johnston that a PT should be able to work at home. And I understand that currently the law doesn't, a pharmacy technician is only a pharmacy technician when they're in the pharmacy. But I imagine that could be changed, and I think it should be. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment.
Our next comment comes from John Gray. John, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. This is John Gray, registered pharmacist of Kaiser Permanente. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'll keep this one brief. I just wanted to echo the comments of board member Patel that our view is that it is best to keep this simple and leave the allowance for remote work open to all pharmacies. The only kind of thing we would suggest that the board ought to think of, the committee and the board ought to think about as it crafts new language is how to write the statutory proposal so that it doesn't interfere with the provisions that will be allowed for hospital pharmacies once AB 1557 is signed by the governor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you for the comments, Dr. Gray.
Our next comment comes from Priti Patel. One moment while I look for you in our list. There you are. I've sent the request to unmute your microphone. You should see a pop-up at your end that says unmute me. You'll need to click that button. Priti Patel, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone. If you can click the unmute me button. Okay, says they are having an issue unmuting. I will wrap back around to them. Next, we have Yvonne. Yvonne, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone. Seems our attendees may be having issues unmuting their microphones. All right, I am going to ask Chair O. Both individuals have submitted comments in the Q&A. They're having issues.
This is the co-moderator. It does appear Priti Patel was able to unmute for a moment, but I do not see her unmuted again. There, Priti, you are unmuted.
Right. Can you hear me all?
Okay. Now we can,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Yes, I am here to support the specialty pharmacists to allow to work from home. With the COVID provision, we've been working from home for 3 years, and now we are in the office or in the pharmacy. So
Thank you for the comment.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead if you're not done.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I'm here to support allowing us, including us, as to work from home as well, because our job, the way we were working is all clinical. We have no interaction with the dispensing part, and we have done it for like last 3 years.
Thank you for the comment.
Next comment comes from Rob Geddes. Rob, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Rob Geddes with Albertsons Companies, and again, I'd like to echo.
Sorry, Rob, you sound a little faint there.
All right, I'll step a little closer. Rob Geddes with Albertsons Companies. Is that any better?
Yes, thank you.
So would echo the comments of my colleagues as well in support of the remote processing working from home. Would also like to see this be universally applied across all disciplines of pharmacy, recognizing that different disciplines will leverage work from home scenarios differently in the way that they can support their own individual workflows. And I think that each discipline, whether it's hospital, pharmacy, retail, specialty, or any other types of pharmacy that are practiced in the state of California would benefit, and also the patients would benefit as well. So we stand in support of this proposal and would like to see this continue forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the comments, Dr. Geddes.
Our next comment comes from a call-in user whose phone number starts with 760628. I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
You should, there you go.
Okay, great. I'm here to support the work from home. I'm a specialty pharmacy representative, and we have been doing it, again, as everybody's been saying, for 3 years. There's been some excellent points. And also it would lessen the carbon footprint in California, which we all know is a big deal, the traffic, stress, and it provides a better interaction for our patients and more efficient workflow. And that's it.
Thank you for the comments.
Thank you. And our last comment, we're going to circle back to Yvonne. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone again. If you're using a computer and a telephone and you've linked your telephone for audio, you will need to unmute both of them. And you should be controlling your audio from the computer or tablet connection. All right, I'm going to move on to Safia. Safia, I've sent the request to unmute your microphone.
Hi, everyone, again. So I just wanted to highlight how I specifically, as a specialty pharmacist, was successfully able to work from home during the pandemic. And I know that authorization was just in place for the pandemic, but it was very successful because our company had specific guidelines of how we can work from home. It wasn't just like everyone figure it out on your own, and we had loose criteria, but everyone was supposed to remote connect to the company's software via using VPN. We also had to hard plug our computer towers into plug-in internet connection. It wasn't anything done through Wi-Fi. We also had to have like a closed door place where no one was had access to our computers. And these were just some of the criteria that our company had in place for us to work safely from work from home. So I just can imagine if we have this in law, that how more specific we can make sure that, you know, our consumers information is not being violated, and we're, you know, using the best practice to care for our patients. So I just wanted to highlight this, that even though we didn't have specific criteria, it was successfully being practiced, at least from what I saw in my company and my role. And I just can't imagine it getting even better for our patients and the company and the consumer. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments.
Thank you. And our last comment comes from Yvonne, who's having some technical difficulties with opening her microphone. So I'm going to read her comments that she did drop in our Q&A panel. She says that I am a California licensed specialty pharmacist that has been working remotely for more than 10 years and direct patient management. I work closely with patients and prescribers only in clinical management and have great relationship. Some patients, I have seen them grow since a child, providing great relationship. This remote environment can provide excellent service and not affecting any of the patient clinical care. This can also reduce driving time with California traffic and save the polluted environment. If a new law needs to be in place, can the waiver be extended? And that concludes her comments. And I believe that that is our last request for comment. I will close the panel.
Thank you so much, moderator. Thank you. Just to hearing some thoughts, I just want to emphasize and clarify, we do have our law that we sponsor, AB 1557, pending in the legislature. So hopefully that answers. Also, just to clarify, we are discussing remote processing of prescriptions dispensed. Remote processing. We're not talking pharmacist permitted procedures outside of pharmacy. I just want to make sure we are talking about remote processing of prescriptions. I think that gets a little confused. I was confused that as well. So just want to make sure we are discussing remote processing of prescriptions dispensed. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about remote processing. So with that, any member comments before I go to the next question? All right, moving on to the next question. Does the committee believe that discussion on these questions should be postponed until after passage of another sponsor bill, AB 1286, the board's patient protection measures? I do believe that some of the concerns that I have potentially could be resolved if requirements proposed in this is established in AB 1286. Most notably related to staffing or secured passage of the measure. So I know that we have to be able to multitask, so I think that we're still going to try to proceed with some sort of a proposal for our next meeting, but just wanted to see your thoughts on remote processing related to AB 1286. I know these are two different things, but for me, at least, it would make me feel more comfortable supporting expanded remote processing if AB 1286 were to be in place. Thoughts, members?
Yeah, I'm not, I think we have to look at everything in totality. And I mean, the legislature is its own beast, obviously. But if the board is looking to support a particular piece of legislation, whether that it authors or that is introduced, and we've obviously been having this conversation for a while, which is important, and going into all of these different details. If 1286 does not get passed, then in my mind it makes it significantly, it makes the hill significantly higher for what needs to be included in any remote processing bill. So I think that, I mean, our strong support of Assemblymember Haney and Senator Wiener's bill and working to get that out of committee and get this passed, if that is able to get through, it'll ease the road that much further. I mean, can't say that it not passing would foreclose any possibility of this, but in my mind, if that does pass with those protections and the updates to statute that it has, the very, very important updates to statute that it has, similar to what you were mentioning, President Sung, that it would definitely relieve a lot of the concerns that I have, and I know several of us have, regarding staffing, regarding ensuring the quality of the pharmacies themselves and the facilities. So that's kind of a long-winded non-answer, I guess. But yeah, I guess it comes back to if 1286 does not pass, it just makes it that much more important that this particular bill, if it ever comes to be, has some of the robust protections in it that 1286 has, if 1286 doesn't pass.
Thank you for the comments, Trevor. Jason?
Yeah, President O, I think that the committee should move forward and regardless of the status of 1286. If it passes and is signed by the governor, then we'll know where we stand, but I think that we can plan ahead and be nimble, much more nimble than the legislature for sure.
Absolutely. I think that's where we're going to hopefully land today. Well,
yeah,
my
I
closing
agree.
remarks. Go ahead, Jessica.
Sorry, I agree. I mean, the legislative process is long, but you know, we're in July now, so I think it's important that we have this ongoing discussion simultaneously as it's moving through the bill. I feel similarly to Trevor in that a lot of the protections provided in 1286 will address some of the concerns in staffing, and just support in the actual brick and mortar pharmacies. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll just keep having the discussion.
Knock on wood. All right. With that, any other? Go ahead, Renee.
This is Renee. Yeah, I would also kind of echo those comments. I think we have sort of two different things. While it's, you know, really important to get those patient protections provided in 1286, I think there's so much else going on with remote processing that I don't see that any, like if that was to be delayed, waiting for this, I think there's other discussions. And, you know, if, for instance, this didn't pass, that could be addressed during that time for remote processing.
Sounds good. Any other thoughts? All right. Ready for public comment in Sacramento?
Hi again, Misty
Hi.
Goldhorn with California Community Pharmacy Coalition. For those of you who were here yesterday, heard the discussion on AB 1286. We are unfortunately opposed to the bill, but again, appreciate working with the board and the amendments that we've been able to work out so far and hope we can continue those discussions. I also think that the discussion on remote processing should be separate from AB 1286. I also think that remote processing is consistent with the goals of AB 1286 in trying to protect patients, reduce medication errors, and I think that allowing some sort of remote processing will help further both of those goals and the goal of the board to protect patients. So in terms of the last discussion, the last question, I also think that any type of remote processing should be expanded to all pharmacy settings, not just specialty or not just specific settings because of this, because I think it really does have the potential to, there's just so many benefits, as you've heard. There's benefits to the workers, there's benefits to patients. I don't see a lot of downsides to allowing remote processing. So I think that the board can move on both tracks. As Board Member Crowley pointed out, the legislative process is long. We're in July, session ends in September, so it's probably too late this year for any type of legislative proposal. But you can have the discussions now and hopefully introduce something next year. So I think that those, both of those things can happen on separate tracks, and I think that they complement each other as well. Thanks.
Thank you for the comments, Lindsay.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I think that I also agree that you should continue the discussion regardless of what happens with 1286. Obviously, the discussion may be somewhat different if 1286 is enacted, and we won't know what final form would be either. I also think it's very important, President Ho, that what you said was that the remote processing is all about dispensing. And that's what we're really talking about. And so we need to be very careful that we understand those parameters. For an example, and I think it was Board Member Crowley that said that they're concerned, they're comfortable with a lot of the DUR, they're comfortable with a lot of the things, but they're not comfortable with final product approval. And certainly, there is one pharmacy that is licensed in California where final product approval is done remotely, and that's the remote site dispensing pharmacy. Right, so there is another type of outpatient pharmacy. There are very strict parameters, though, about how that must be done with interactive audio-visual review by a pharmacist and the parent pharmacy, et cetera. So if you're going to discuss that for remotely, there is already a model for that, and to be very careful about that's what this is really all about. The other thing that I want to mention is you want to be careful about when you hear about what other states do and what they don't do or what they allow or don't allow about pharmacy technicians. California definition of a pharmacy technician is different from virtually every other state. That what differentiates a pharmacy technician in California is all about dispensing. There are 4 tasks that differentiate a pharmacy clerk or a pharmacy assistant from a pharmacy technician. The technician can take the bottle from the shelf, can count the pills out, can put the pills in the bottle and affix the label. And they can also assist with mixing and so forth. People call that compounding, but the statute says it's mixing. Compounding is something reserved for pharmacists. So don't be very careful when you hear about what other states allow. In virtually every other state, everybody in the pharmacy is a technician. They're either registered, licensed, or unregistered, right? So be very careful when you talk about the dispensing, and one of the big issues is the final product approval. The second big issue is who does the consultation. And one of the other states, for an example, require that the pharmacy document which pharmacist does the consultation. And in other states, the standard of practice is they not only document which pharmacist does the consultation, but what is the gist or what is the content of that consultation. California doesn't have any law that requires pharmacy to document which pharmacist did the consultation or what was included in the consultation. Pharmacies have adopted that on their own for liability protection, but you might want to look at that also as an issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gray. Seeing none at Sacramento, we'll open up for WebEx. Shelley, please open up for public comment.
Thank you. And my name is Ann. I'm taking over as moderator for now. Hello. And we are opening up the WebEx Q&A to facilitate public comment. If you'd like to make a comment on the issue, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, or you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your WebEx screen. Click that, type the word comment, and click send. Each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 10-second warning. Are there any requests for comment? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
Okay, next question before I move on. Any thoughts? Nope. Okay. Does the committee believe the board should sponsor legislation in this area? I believe the answer to this question in part will depend on if we reach consensus that changes are appropriate. I think we're getting there. However, even if the board does reach consensus, the question of whether the board should actively sponsor legislation or rather use these discussions to develop a policy that can be relied upon by the board to responding to legislation sponsored by others should be considered. I believe consensus among stakeholders may be a challenge because of competing interests. As Member Chandler has reminded us on occasion, an alternative to sponsoring legislation could be for the board to have a solution ready should the legislature ask. I believe there are pros and cons to both approaches. I do note that given the varying options among stakeholders, this could be an area that we ideally pass through sunset review, but maybe time-wise we do need to act faster. So with that, I think it is best that we are in the driver's seat on this issue, but open for your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree that we should just continue moving ahead as if we're going to have legislation, regardless of whether or not it actually comes to fruition. As we've seen, simply putting out putting out a sponsored bill and getting a sponsor doesn't guarantee anything in general. So whether it's sunset, whether it's a recommendation, or whether it eventually ends up being a board-sponsored bill, I think the best use of our time and best case scenario is just to act as if we are going to introduce something, because one way or another we can just adapt it for whatever purposes we need.
Thank you.
I think I would concur with Trevor's comments here. I think the board is a conduit to pharmacists and multiple stakeholders. So I think it's important that we make a stake on this issue.
Thank you, Jason. Any other thoughts? Okay, we're open up for public comment in Sacramento. Seeing none, we will open up for public comment in WebEx.
And this is the moderator. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A to facilitate public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. You may look for the question mark icon, click that, type the word comment, and click send. Or our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 10-second warning. Are there any comments? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to our last question. Does the committee believe the board would benefit from additional flexibility to develop regulations in this area by securing broader regulation authority specific to remote processing? I believe this question poses an interesting policy area. Generally, where the board has rulemaking authority, it is easier at times for the board to parse out issue and respond more dynamically through rulemaking. Expanding rulemaking authority in this area may provide the board and stakeholders with greater flexibility in developing potential authority in this area. I'm inclined to agree that the board would benefit from flexibility to develop regulations in this area. The details of what can be unclear, but I would imagine we can start with legislature by requesting amendment to give clear authority to promulgate regulations. And I think this is the landing spot I'm hoping we can land today, at least agreeing upon some path forward. I think flexibility is very important, and allowing some opportunities to open up that flexibility, I think, is what we really should seek in first step. So then hopefully we can promulgate regulations. With that, members, what are your thoughts?
I guess my question is, what do we mean by additional flexibility to develop regulation?
So the original question of remote processing, it was very clear to us that there is no statutory authority currently in our power to promulgate regulations in this area, or that the law change was necessary to allow remote processing. So from there, we're trying to open up opportunities. We're seeking legislature to support the bill that we had drafted back in 2021 that did not go anywhere. And I think that from here, if we are given clear authority to regulate and promulgate regulations in terms of remote dispensing, that probably is a first step in allowing us to be able to have some frameworks. And then from there on, I would think that the board could promulgate regulations, what guardrails. So that's the kind of a thinking behind this question. So hopefully that makes sense.
How do we get that flexibility?
So that would involve statutory change. But so my thinking on this question is, instead of having a statutory proposal that is so detailed, so rigid, that let's ask for regulatory authority, that there we would develop regulations and promulgate regulations from there. So then within there, we are able to have guardrails from there. So I think that's a reasonable step for, in my opinion, which I'll include in my closing comments, depending on from what I hear from you guys, to go next step in our tight timeline and where we need to go. So what are your thoughts?
I find this idea intriguing. I mean, in short, we're just asking the legislature to give us the power to make the changes ourselves, right? And I think, while obviously our regulation processes are intensive, as they should be, that's a better venue, especially when it relates to technology and constant innovations in technology, than having to rely on a legislative process, which is more rulemaking, regulatory, and broader, when on any given year or session the legislature has to deal with these sorts of issues, which may or may not have priority, which may or may not, depending on the budget season, all of these various avenues. So I personally would be in support. And again, the key part for me in this is, especially as it relates to remote processing, we're entering another era when AI is coming into play, all of these issues constantly evolving, that it will inevitably impact pharmacy, and inevitably, since remote processing is obviously technology-based, somehow that will come into play. I think giving us a little bit more of a nimble ability to address these things, and again, it's just simply giving the board the rule-making authority to do this. Our processes are extremely thorough in place, that we can't simply vote on something and make a change. It has to go through many avenues before the final rulemaking process is done. If it were as simple as giving us the authority to wave a wand and change something, it would give me concerns. But the fact that we have such a stringent rulemaking process in place, and for something that's still a very dynamic technology as it relates to all of these things, I would be in support of that, and I think it would give us the leeway to begin making the changes rather than having to wait every 2 years, depending on the varying priorities of the legislature, given all of those issues. So it's something that I'm intrigued by, and sounds like something that I would support.
Thank you, Trevor.
So I think that also makes sense. I do have more questions in terms of what does that look like? Is this something that we would have to push through the legislature? Would it drag things out even further if we don't have something developed? So those are the things that run through my mind, but I would say from a broad perspective, yes, that makes sense. It would be good to have that flexibility and have this ongoing discussion. And then the other question I have is, what is the likelihood that we would actually be granted that authority to make those decisions on our own? And do we think that's a realistic opportunity?
We'll do our best. We'll try our best. Any other comments on that question, members? Agreeing and disagreeing? I agree. Okay. Silence as agreeing, Renee and Jason? Okay, all right.
No, I would say I would agree. I mean, I think just the key part of being flexible, trying to minimize the time, but any route is going to take some time, right?
Well, since you asked, Sung, I think that requesting that flexibility would be appropriate for this board. The likelihood of it passing through the legislature, I don't know, but we can give it a shot.
Sounds good. Okay, with that, go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, and just one of the things, I mean, given it seems like when it comes to remote processing, the overall board strategy is multi-track, and I think that this shouldn't be pursued as a replacement to any of the other tracks, but as 1286 goes through, as a potential remote processing bill goes through, I think this shouldn't replace any of those. It should just be in addition. So even if there is a remote processing bill that's introduced, I don't think that would foreclose this sort of request as well, saying, okay, the legislature made this statutory change, and now that you've made this decision, we would also like you to give us the power. And maybe it's a part of the bill, the remote processing bill that's in there as well. But it could be not just two separate bills, but it could be one. So just as we think about that, not thinking about it as a zero sum, as a one avenue or the next, we can just put all our chips on the table and see where the legislature decides to stop the ball.
Thank you, Trevor. No comments. All right. With that, we're ready for public comment in Sacramento.
Again, thank you for the chance to comment. I completely agree. We have long had problems in pharmacy with getting too much detail in the statutes. And anytime we can, where there is something needed, it can go in regulation that is preferred. However, we also have had periods where it was actually quicker to do something by statute than it was by regulation. I think we're past that now, but I want to, keep in mind that we've had those periods, so it may not be. I also would hope you would continue discussion and really look carefully at what statutory authority do you really need. I think there are some things you've talked about. You may already have the statutory authority to modify with regulations, and there may be others that you need more authority, and there may be some statutes that are in your way. So for an example, on 4107.1, the remote entry of prescriptions, one of the reasons it excluded controlled substances because there was an issue at the time of whether having a pharmacist remotely enter a prescription or a prescriber remotely enter a prescription for a controlled substance via that process was actually a violation of DEA law. And so you may have to look a little bit broader about what you need to change or what you can do in regulation and what you can't do. But I would go a little bit more into the detail and what would it look like. And for an example, I personally believe that you already have the authority to require documentation, for an example, of which pharmacist did the consultation. And that may be something that makes it clear to have that discussion of whether that you want this part of remote processing or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. Any public comments before? This is the last opportunity for public comment on remote processing topic for today. So okay. Moderator, open the line for public comment for WebEx, please.
If you'd like to make a comment, you may look for the question mark icon. And typically that's in the lower right corner of your WebEx screen. Click that, type the word comment, and click send, or anyone may raise their hand to request a comment, and our call-in users can press *3 to raise their hand. We do have a request from John Gray. John, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes with a 10-second warning.
Thank you.
And you're unmuted.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks again. This is John Gray, registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Just want to say that we see the discussion around asking the legislature to provide the board with the authority to write regulations on pharmacist remote work to be a sensible approach, and think that that is definitely worth pursuing. I would say that if the committee and ultimately the board decide to take that approach, another thing to consider asking the legislature for the authority to write regulations on is the ability to engage in final product verification by remote processing, specifically for compounded sterile products. As you know, there are several technological systems, commonly referred to as IV workload management systems, that help automate the processes associated with preparing, verifying, tracking, and documenting compounded sterile products. Many of these systems use barcode technology to ensure the correct product selection and digital photography to capture and track each step of the CSP preparation process. The commercial availability of these systems means that it is possible for pharmacists at a remote site to perform product verification of a compounded sterile product that was prepared elsewhere. There have been studies a study out of the University of North Carolina that demonstrated that with the use of an IV workload management system, there was no difference in the accuracy and safety of sterile product pharmacist checks performed remotely, and those performed at the product preparation site. And during the COVID-19 public health emergency, the Iowa State Board of Pharmacy explicitly allowed for pharmacists to perform remote product verification of compounded products. So, I think what I'm suggesting is probably, the board isn't there yet, isn't ready yet to think about allowing remote product verification of compounded sterile products. But I think given the technology that's already out there and that will continue to mature, they may be there someday. And so, I would just suggest thinking about crafting the language such that it could allow you the authority in the future to also write regulations on remote product verification of compounded sterile products. Thanks very much for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you, Dr. Gray.
And this is the moderator. I do not see any further requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Anne, moderator. So with that, we've discussed all 5 questions. I just want to have some closing remarks, and I'll have members opportunities to provide some remarks here on some closing thoughts here. So on, obviously, first question, I think we're all in agreement that with some guardrails and also defining some specific remote processing, I think most members who would hope that the staffing would not be affected by it, I think will help rural and specialty pharmacies. So I think everyone in general is in agreement that some sort of remote processing would benefit consumers. Also, on the next question, I don't believe that we are in agreement that it would be good to sparse out and that it's probably best to keep it simple, to not complicate it by picking specialty pharmacies or closed-door pharmacies. So that is, I think we're all in agreement with that. On the third question, does the committee believe that discussion on these questions should be postponed until after the passage of AB 1286? I think we're in general in agreement that we should look at this opportunity. Passage of the bill would make it easier for us to move forward, but in general, I think we need to look at both ways and be able to multitask. On the fourth question, yes, I think it's best that we sponsor the legislation. And lastly, on the last question, seems like we're in general agreement that it would be good to have flexibility to develop regulation. So I see a path forward as, one, flexibility, asking for the legislatures to give us the authority to be able to promulgate regulation in specific to remote dispensing, remote processing, not remote dispensing, remote processing. Because currently there is no clear regulatory authority, it seems like, about us allowing remote processing authority. So that would be a step one, and I can bring it back to the board for next October licensing committee for a proposal that would include that. If, and I'll open this up, if there's any specific minimum, very important issues that you think that should be included in that proposal, also please speak up. But I think it's best to keep it simple and flexible is how I feel, that then the board can have a full-on discussion once we have the regulatory authority on what would be the requirement. And another thought is that through this discussion, I'm always trying to figure out a path forward. I'm always hoping that we have a way to move things forward for innovation, technology. It's great things to just say innovation and technology is all-in solution for everything. I think that the right way, and we're humans are always involved in those innovation and technology, and you know, that's not just an excuse for us to say innovation and technology will fix everything. It's got to be balanced. But it would be great for some sort of experimental programs, I think currently the limitation on experimental programs is that we can only waive regulatory requirement, not statutory requirement, and I'll have Ann speak more on that topic. And lastly, Ann will hate me for this, but I think another path forward is regulated public may not like it, but I think just to give us flexibility is possibly opening up opportunity for petitioning the board for them to perform remote processing. However, of course, that would require statutory change as well. So I think just opening up some flexibility, because I'm sure there are businesses that I would feel very comfortable that they do remote processing and continue to do so, and some businesses that I would say, oh no, I don't feel comfortable at all. And I think that the board, given that authority, would allow for some flexibility, and I think our staff hopefully would be able to handle that as well. So with that, and if you want to speak a little more about the experimental programs and just your thoughts on this issue.
Yeah, what I would say is I think that one of the potential values to developing the proposal through regulation is that there is authority in 1706.5, had to make sure I had the right section of the law, that does allow for there to be studies to allow for innovation. And under the regulatory authority, it's authority for the board to suspend regulations. It does not extend to statute. So as we talk about evolving technologies and those kinds of things, if the provisions for remote processing were in regulation, then the board could consider research in this area and suspend some of the regulations to then understand the impact of it. So the provisions are not used very often, but Tech Check Tech, I think, is a good example of where the board was able to suspend some of its regulations for the purposes of studying the issue to then evaluate the outcome to determine whether or not changes in the law were appropriate. So I just wanted to highlight that might be one of the benefits to putting the provisions of remote work into regulation versus statute because of that authority that you have.
So I think next step is on the next meeting, we'll have a statutory proposal that would include the regulatory authority and possibly some other languages, and then we'll probably consider that, and hopefully we can move forward for statutory proposal next year when the legislature convenes for a new session next year. So with that, any thoughts, members? This is a topic we've discussed ad nauseum for many meetings, so.
This is Renee. I think I would just add, and this is maybe, at least for myself or some public members, in terms of understanding if we're going to have a lot of flexibility, maybe understanding of who's doing remote, or wants to do remote verification. Because there was a couple, or listed, somebody mentioned about assisted living. I mean, that's not something I'm aware of. And so I don't know what are we really looking at here? Like, I know we're talking about specialty. I understand specialty in the way that, I think we all, or not, well, anyway, we all have maybe a different experience with it for hospital-based, community-based. So, just like a better understanding, so knowing if we're being flexible enough, or see some things that look like there needs to be some guardrails. So somewhere to help us land what's flexible and what's maybe too constrained. Anyway, just in the future.
Got it. Thank you. Any lasting thoughts before we move on from this topic? Okay. Seeing none, ready to move on. Okay. Oh my God, I think it's 11 o'clock, but I think next two will be quick, so I think we can just power through if the members are okay. All right. discussion and consideration of the committee's strategic objectives. As indicated in the meeting materials, the licensing committee has 9 strategic objectives. The meeting materials include updates on the objectives, highlighting our efforts over the past year. You'll note that objective 1.6 is complete, a little controversial, but it is complete. As the chair of the committee, I intend to focus more review on objective 1.2 in the coming year. I also believe additional discussion on the pharmacy technician program could be addressed in the coming year, consistent with the objective 1.3. I note that objectives 1.7, 1.8, and 1.9 are tied to the board's business modernization activities, which we are very excited, hopefully will convening soon. Generally, I believe they remain appropriate and do not believe any changes are appropriate. Members, I would welcome your thoughts on the strategic objectives. If the committee members believe any other strategic objective should be identified or modified, please feel free to speak up as well, members. Hearing none, thank you, our board staff, for always working so hard and diligently in us accomplishing these strategic objectives. With that, public comment in Sacramento? Seeing none, moderator, if you could please open the line for public comments in WebEx.
Certainly. And we are opening up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment on the board's strategic objectives. If anyone would like to make a comment, they can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment in that text box and click send. Anyone may also raise their hand to ask to be recognized, and our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Are there any comments on the strategic objectives? I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator.
You're welcome.
All right, with that, we're moving on to the next agenda item, discussion and consideration of the licensing statistics. Members, the meeting materials include a summary of the licensing statistics for the year. The board has issued 7,619 licenses to individuals and 1,105 site licenses, which includes 335 temporary licenses. A review of processing time shows improvement in some areas. However, improvements is needed in most areas. The data report reflects the oldest application of each application type. Again, the data reflects the oldest application of each application type. I highlight that only so that members understand the board's average processing time is shorter than what is reported. The most significant improvement is in the pharmacy technician licensing program, where the time dropped from 81 days to 38 days. As we have discussed on several occasions, staff vacancies are a primary driver of the processing times. As of July 1st, there are 5 vacancies in licensing unit. I'd like to publicly commend, and share gratitude for our licensing staff who have demonstrated great commitment to applicants during this time, many of them who are taking time away from their family and friends, working overtime, working weekends to address these backlogs. Big thank you to our licensing staff. Sincerely appreciate you. I'd like to request that an update on the pending times be provided during the August full board meeting so members can continue to monitor the progress. Members, any thoughts? And public comment in Sacramento then. We have one public comment in Sacramento.
Thank you again, Steve Gray. I think it would be helpful to put things in perspective is when we get this report on licensing, we also get a report on the number of currently active licenses, so that if it says we had 294, I don't know if that's in the materials, but it wasn't in the summary I looked at, and then that gives us a respective. And then the other process is in relation to how many pharmacies actually closed. We hear about that all the time, but I don't remember seeing any definitive data. And it's confusing because when you go in and look at the license type, you see that a license at a particular location for a particular company was canceled, and then you see that apparently immediately thereafter it was opened up again with a different license number. And so it's hard to really get a feel for what the situation is with the number of pharmacies and so forth in California. Again, that may be my fault in not understanding how to read the data, but it wasn't obvious to me, and I'm old, so maybe that's just my fault.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. I think they're included in the meeting material.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, though. Okay, with that, any WebEx? Moderator?
Thank you. We've opened up the WebEx Q&A to facilitate public comment. If anyone has a comment on the licensing statistics, you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. You can click on the question mark icon and type the word comment in that text box and click send, or our call-in users may press *3 to raise their hand. Each speaker will have 3 minutes with a 10-second warning. Any comments on the licensing statistics? I do not see any request for comment. Shall I close that feature?
Yes, please. Thank you, moderator. Appreciate it. All right.
President Fenton? Yes. I just have one kind of random out of the blue question looking at licenses issued. I was wondering if staff could, I'm wondering what a designated paramedic, the DPM license is, because it just jumps out to me that we've only issued one license in the last year for a designated paramedic, so I'm just curious as to what that is.
And go ahead.
So it is a very specific license type for a very specific type of automated drug delivery system that is used by a fire department. So there's only one actual automated drug delivery license as well. So when you hear the board meeting, you're going to get an update on that. And so there is one license issued specific to that.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. With that, our next agenda item is future meeting dates and adjournment. Before we adjourn today, I'd like to thank everyone for your time and participation. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for October 18th, 2023 in person, as well as WebEx, and possibly one satellite location as well. So please monitor the board's website for updates. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for always your inputs and great thoughts. Appreciate your time.